You have probably done this more times than you can count. You walk into the grocery store, grab a piece of ginger, glance at the price tag, and think to yourself, when did this get so expensive? And then maybe you have had this thought too. What if I just grew my own? So you look it up, and everything you find says ginger is a tropical plant, needs heat, needs humidity, needs months of warm weather outdoors, and if you are not in zone 9 or higher, well, good luck. That is what I thought for the longest time. When I first tried growing ginger close to 15 years ago, I treated it like an outdoor summer crop. I planted it in a raised bed, crossed my fingers, and waited. Some of it sprouted, most of it rotted. And the stuff that did grow gave me these tiny, sad little rhizomes that were barely worth the effort. It took me 3 full seasons of failure before I finally asked the right question. Instead of asking, how do I grow ginger outside, I started asking, what does this plant actually need, and can I give it those things indoors? The answer changed everything. Ginger does not care whether it is inside or outside. It cares about temperature, light, moisture, and time. Give it the right conditions, and it will grow just as well on a shelf in Ohio as it does in a garden bed in Queensland. In this video, I'm going to walk you through the complete process of growing ginger indoors, from a piece of store-bought root to a full harvest any time of year in any climate. Every step comes with the science behind it, so you understand exactly why it works. And the bonus tip near the end is a method I stumbled onto in my 3rd year of indoor growing that basically gives you a never-ending supply. Stick around for that one. Here is why this matters more than you might think. Ginger is one of those crops that most home gardeners never even consider because they assume it is off limits for their climate. But once you understand what ginger actually needs, you realize that an indoor setup gives you more control than any outdoor garden bed ever could. You control the temperature, you control the moisture, you control the light. Get those 3 things dialed in, and ginger becomes one of the most reliable and low-maintenance crops you can grow. Get them wrong, though, and you end up with rotting rhizomes, leggy yellow shoots, and nothing to show for months of waiting. Understanding the science behind each step eliminates the guesswork completely. I am going to take you through this in a logical order. We will start with selecting the right ginger from the store, then move into prepping it, setting up your container and soil, planting, managing light and temperature, watering and feeding, and finally harvesting. I will wrap up with the most common problems and how to fix them. Every step builds on the one before it, so the whole process should click into place as we go. Firm, plump, and heavy for its size. That is what you are looking for when you pick ginger off the shelf. The science behind this is actually pretty simple. Each piece of ginger is a rhizome, which is basically an underground stem that stores energy. The firmer and heavier it feels, the more energy it has stored, and that energy is exactly what fuels the first several weeks of growth, before roots even form. Shriveled, lightweight pieces have already burned through most of their reserves. They might sprout, but they usually do not have the energy to sustain growth long enough to establish a root system. Now, here is the thing most people miss. Look for the little bumps on the surface. Those are called eyes, and they are dormant growth points, basically tiny buds waiting to activate. A rhizome with 3 or 4 visible eyes gives you a much better starting point than one with smooth skin all the way around. I learned this the hard way. My first batch was all smooth, beautiful looking ginger. Not a single eye on any piece. I waited 8 weeks and got nothing. The second time around, I specifically chose knobbier pieces with visible bumps, and every single one sprouted within 3 to 4 weeks. It felt like cracking a code. One more thing, if you can find organic certified ginger, that is a bonus, but it is not a requirement. The real key is freshness. You want tight skin, not wrinkled. You want weight, not air. Pick it up and trust your hands. 24 to 48 hours. That is how long your ginger needs to soak before you plant it. Let me explain why this actually matters. Most commercial ginger is treated with a growth inhibitor before it hits the store shelves. This is usually a chemical compound designed to suppress sprouting, so the ginger stays sellable for longer. Makes sense from a retail perspective, but it is the single biggest reason home growers fail on their first attempt. They plant treated ginger, Nothing sprouts for months, and they assume they did something wrong. They did not. The ginger was chemically told not to grow. Soaking in plain room temperature water for at least 24 hours dissolves the surface level inhibitor. 48 hours is better if you have the patience. You will notice the water turning slightly cloudy or yellowish. That is normal. That is the residue coming off. When I first started out, I made this exact mistake. I planted ginger straight from the bag, watered it faithfully for 10 weeks, and got absolutely nothing. The following year, I read about the soaking step, tried it, and had sprouts within 3 weeks. Same store, same ginger, completely different result. One step made all the difference. After soaking, let the pieces air dry on a towel for a few hours before planting. You want the surface dry to the touch. This reduces the risk of fungal issues once the ginger goes into soil. That brings us to the container and the soil, and this is where getting the dimensions right really pays off. 14 inches wide at minimum. That is your target for a single container planting. Depth matters less. 8 to 10 inches handles the root system comfortably. Now let me explain why those numbers matter. Ginger does not grow downward like a carrot or a parsnip. It spreads horizontally, creeping along just beneath the soil surface. So the width of your container directly determines how much room each rhizome has to expand and branch. I measured this across 3 seasons in my own setup. Anything under 12 inches started getting visibly crowded by midsummer, and crowded rhizomes produce smaller, thinner pieces. 14 inches gives each planting room to spread without competition. 16 is even better if you have the space. The depth is less critical because the root system stays shallow, usually concentrated in the top 5 to 6 inches of soil. For the soil itself, you want something that holds moisture but drains fast. Here is the mix I have been using for the last 6 years with consistent results. 70% high-quality potting mix and 30% perlite. The potting mix provides nutrients and moisture retention. The perlite creates air pockets that prevent compaction and let excess water escape. The science behind this is straightforward. Ginger rhizomes are extremely sensitive to anaerobic conditions. That means if the soil stays waterlogged and oxygen cannot reach the roots, decay sets in fast. Perlite solves that problem without sacrificing the moisture ginger needs. When you fill your container, leave about 2 inches of space below the rim. This gives you room to top off with more mix later as rhizomes push toward the surface. You want the soil to feel damp but not soggy. Squeeze a handful. It should hold together briefly like a wrung-out sponge, then crumble apart. That texture tells you the moisture to air ratio is right. Once your container is ready, planting is quick and simple, but the details matter more than you might expect. 1 to 2 inches below the surface, eyes facing upward, pieces spaced 4 to 5 inches apart. The science behind this is worth understanding. Ginger evolved as a shallow-growing plant. In the wild, rhizomes sit just barely below the soil surface, where oxygen levels are highest and temperature fluctuations are smallest. Planting deeper than 2 inches pushes the rhizome into a zone where moisture lingers longer and air circulation drops. That is exactly the combination that triggers rot. I tested this myself one season. I planted half my rhizomes at 1 inch deep and the other half at 3 inches deep. The shallow planted pieces sprouted an average of 9 days faster, and by harvest, the shallow group had noticeably larger rhizomes. The deep planted group lost 2 pieces to rot entirely. The eyes face upward because the shoots that emerge from them are phototropic. That means they grow toward light. Planting eyes up gives the emerging shoot the shortest, most direct path to the surface. Planting them sideways or downward forces the shoot to curve and redirect, which costs the plant energy it could be putting into root and rhizome development instead. Once your pieces are positioned, cover them gently with your soil mix. Do not pack it down. You want light, loose coverage. After covering, you should still be able to faintly feel the shape of the rhizome through the soil if you press gently with your fingertips. That tells you the depth is right. Give the container a gentle watering to settle the soil around the rhizomes. Not a heavy soak, just enough to moisten the top few inches evenly. Then set it in a warm spot and let the ginger do its thing. If you're finding this helpful, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. I put out new videos every week where I break down the science behind growing better food at home. It is free, and it means you will not miss the next one. All right, let us keep going. This is where growing indoors gives you a genuine advantage over outdoor growing, and the reason comes down to control. 6 to 8 hours of bright indirect light per day. A consistent temperature range between 68 and 85 degrees Fahrenheit. Those are the two numbers that matter most. Let me explain why. Ginger evolved as an understory plant in tropical forests. It grew beneath taller trees, receiving filtered light rather than direct sun. Indoors, that translates to bright indirect light, the kind you get near a south-facing window without the sun hitting the leaves directly. Direct indoor sun through glass can actually scorch ginger leaves because the glass intensifies the heat. I found this out the hard way when I put my first indoor tray right on a south-facing windowsill in July. Burned leaf tips within 4 days. If your windows do not provide 6 hours of good light, a basic full-spectrum LED grow light solves the problem completely. I run mine about 12 inches above the canopy for 8 hours a day on a simple timer. The plants respond to it just as well as natural light. In some cases, better, because the consistency is something a window just cannot match through winter. Temperature is the other critical factor. Below 60 degrees Fahrenheit, ginger enters dormancy. The plant essentially shuts down and stops producing new rhizome growth. Above 85 degrees, you start to see heat stress, especially in dry indoor air. Most homes sit comfortably in that 68 to 75 degree range year-round, which is right in the sweet spot. That is the whole reason indoor growing works so well. Your house is already set to the temperature ginger prefers. Once your ginger has sprouted and is actively growing, watering and feeding become your two main jobs, and both follow the same principle. Consistent, but not excessive. Water when the top inch of soil feels dry to the touch. Feed once a month with a balanced liquid fertilizer at half the recommended strength. The science behind this is actually pretty simple. Ginger stores moisture inside its rhizomes. That is what makes them plump and juicy. Because of this built-in water reserve, the plant tolerates brief dry periods far better than it tolerates sitting in wet soil. Overwatering is the #1 killer of indoor ginger. It creates the anaerobic conditions I mentioned earlier, and once rot starts in a rhizome, it spreads fast. The finger test is the most reliable method I have found. Stick your index finger 1 inch into the soil. If it feels dry at that depth, water thoroughly until you see a little runoff from the drainage holes. If it still feels damp, wait another day and check again. Through the active growing months, I typically water my indoor containers every 3 to 4 days, but I always check first rather than watering on a set schedule. For fertilizer, half strength is key. Containers have limited soil volume, and full-strength fertilizer builds up salt residue over time. That salt accumulation damages fine root hairs, which are the structures that actually absorb water and nutrients. Half-strength once a month feeds the plant without creating toxic buildup. I use a standard 10-10-10 balanced liquid fertilizer diluted to half. Nothing fancy. Consistent and gentle does the job. 4 months for young ginger. 8 to 10 months for a full, mature harvest. Those are your two windows. The difference between them is significant, and which one you choose depends on what you want. Young ginger, harvested around the 4-month mark, has thin, almost papery skin. The flavor is milder, more floral, and you do not need to peel it at all. Mature ginger, harvested when the leaves begin to yellow and die back at 8 to 10 months, has the thick skin and fibrous, pungent heat that you're used to from the store. Here is the thing most people miss. You do not have to harvest the entire container at once. I pull from the edges of the pot, gently working my fingers around the outer rhizomes and snapping off what I need while leaving the center of the plant undisturbed. The remaining ginger keeps growing and filling back in. This way, one container can feed you for weeks. When you do decide to harvest everything, save 2 or 3 of the healthiest pieces with visible eyes. Those become your next planting stock. You never need to buy ginger again. Now let me run through the problems you are most likely to encounter and exactly what to do about them. Rhizome rot before any sprouts appear. That is almost always a moisture problem. Either the soil was too wet at planting, the container has poor drainage, or the rhizome was planted too deep. The fix is to start with damp but not saturated soil. Make sure your container has drainage holes and keep planting depth at 1 to 2 inches maximum. Pale, leggy shoots, reaching upward with long gaps between leaves. That is a light deficiency signal. The plant is stretching toward whatever light source it can find, putting energy into stem length instead of leaf and rhizome development. Move the container to a brighter location or add a grow light running 8 hours per day at 12 inches above the plant. Yellow leaves with green veins starting from the bottom of the plant. Classic nutrient deficiency. The plant is pulling mobile nutrients from older leaves to feed new growth. A half-strength balanced fertilizer application should correct it within 2 weeks. If you have not been feeding at all, start a monthly schedule immediately. No sprouting after 6 weeks. 2 likely causes: either the growth inhibitor was not fully removed, in which case soak a fresh piece for 48 hours and replant, or the temperature is too low. Ginger needs consistent warmth above 65 degrees to break dormancy. Check the placement. A cold windowsill in winter can drop below that threshold at night, even if your house feels warm during the day. Now, this is something I stumbled onto about 5 years into my indoor ginger growing, and it completely changed how I think about harvest. Timing. Instead of planting one big container and waiting 8 months, I start a new container every 3 to 4 months. That means at any given time, I have 2 or 3 containers at different growth stages. One is just sprouting. One is in active growth. One is ready to harvest. The science behind this is straightforward. Ginger has a single growth curve. It sprouts, grows, matures, and then enters dormancy. One planting gives you one harvest window. But by staggering your plantings, you create overlapping cycles. I always have fresh ginger available without ever waiting months for a single crop to finish. It took me a while to connect the dots on this one, but once I did, I never went back to single batch planting. That is everything I have for you today. Gardening is one of those things where the more you learn, the more you realize there is to discover. If you found this helpful, hit that subscribe button so you do not miss the next one. Happy gardening, and I will see you in the next video.